Everyone is talking about America. Everyone is talking about Iran, Israel, China, Saudi Arabia. But there is one country that nobody is discussing, a country sitting completely silent on the sidelines of this war, watching, waiting, calculating, and when this is all over, this country will shock the entire world. That country is Japan. Now I know exactly what you're thinking. Japan, the country with the oldest population on Earth, the country stuck in economic stagnation for 30 years, the country that imports almost everything it needs just to survive, that Japan is going to win? Yes. And by the end of this, you'll understand exactly why. But first, I need to be completely honest with you about how bad things actually look, because the surface picture is ugly, and you need to see the full ugliness before you understand why the surface is lying to you. Japan's problems are real. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Start with demographics. Japan doesn't just have an aging population. It has the oldest population on the entire planet. Over 28% of Japanese citizens are above 65 years old, and that number climbs every single year. Fewer workers, less innovation, less productivity, a growing wave of elderly care crushing the younger generation underneath it. That alone would cripple most countries, but it gets worse. For 30 years, Japan has been trapped in something economists call a deflationary spiral. Prices falling, wages frozen, debt piling up, growth barely moving. While China was exploding at 8, 9, 10% growth per year, Japan was crawling at 1%. 30 years, 1%. And then there's the resource problem. Japan is a small island nation with almost no natural resources. No meaningful oil, no meaningful gas, not enough agricultural land to feed its own people. It imports nearly everything required to keep its economy alive, which creates a fourth problem. One that could be existential. Japan gets approximately 75% of its energy from the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE. And that energy travels by ship through one of the most critical waterways on Earth, passing directly past Taiwan. Here's why that matters. China has made it crystal clear. Taiwan will be reunified. That is not a question of if. In Beijing's mind, it is only a question of when. And if China takes Taiwan, it doesn't just gain an island. It gains a chokehold over Japan's entire energy supply. No invasion needed, no missiles needed. China could bring Japan to its knees without firing a single shot, just by controlling the water. So on paper, Japan looks like a nation in serious trouble. Oldest population, decades of stagnation, no resources, completely dependent on imported energy, vulnerable to Chinese pressure. And yet, I would invest every single dollar of $1 billion in Japan. Not half in Japan and half in China, all of it in Japan. Here's why. Stop thinking like an economist for a moment. Start thinking like a historian, because economists look at data, debt ratios, demographic curves, GDP growth rates, and yes, all of that data says Japan is struggling. But historians look at patterns. They look at what a people have done when their backs were completely against the wall, when survival itself was in question, when every rational analysis said it was over. And when you study Japan through that lens, you see something that the economic data completely misses. Let me show you 3 moments. The year is 1274. The most powerful military force in human history is preparing to invade Japan, the Mongol Empire. By this point, the Mongols have already crushed China. They've conquered Central Asia, Persia, Russia. Not a single nation on Earth has successfully stopped a full-scale Mongol invasion. Not one. And Japan at this moment, a small feudal nation, divided into rival clans constantly fighting each other. No unified army, no central command, no experience against an enemy of this scale. On paper, Japan has no chance, but here's what happened. The Japanese fought back with a ferocity nobody expected, a unity nobody anticipated from a nation so divided, and then a massive typhoon struck the Mongol fleet. The Japanese called it the kamikaze, the divine wind. The invasion failed, but the Mongols came back 7 years later, 1281, an even larger force, the biggest naval invasion fleet the world had ever seen. And again, the Japanese fought with the same ferocity, the same refusal to break, the same absolute will to survive. And again, another typhoon, another Mongol defeat. A feudal, divided island nation defeated the greatest empire on Earth twice. That tells you something important. When Japan faces an existential threat, it unifies, it fights, and it finds a way to survive that no one watching believed was possible. But that was the 13th century. Maybe it was just luck. Maybe the typhoons were just coincidence. So let's go forward 600 years. The year is around 1850, and the Western powers are carving up Asia like a dinner table. Britain colonized India. France took Southeast Asia. China was being dismembered. The entire continent was falling, piece by piece, to Western industrial power. And Japan was next. Japan was still feudal, still using samurai swords, still cut off from the modern world. Against the full industrial and military force of the West, there was no realistic scenario in which Japan survived as an independent nation. None. And then Japan did something that stunned the entire world. It made a collective national decision. Not one leader, not one decree, a collective decision. We are going to look at everything that made the West powerful, their technology, their factories, their military organization, their scientific knowledge, and we are going to master all of it in one generation. 20 to 30 years later, Japan had a modern navy, a modern army, modern universities, modern factories. And in 1905, Japan defeated Russia, the Russian Empire, a European great power, in open military conflict. The first time in modern history that an Asian nation had defeated a European empire. From feudal isolation to defeating a European superpower in a single generation. That is not resilience. That is something almost without parallel in human history. But we're still not at the most extraordinary example. August 1945. Japan has just suffered the most devastating military defeat in its entire history. 2 atomic bombs dropped on its cities, firebombing campaigns that destroyed most of its urban centers, its navy destroyed, its army defeated, its economy completely shattered. By any measure, Japan in 1945 was finished. Not damaged, not struggling, finished. And 20 years later, Japan was the world's greatest manufacturing power. Not one of the greatest, the greatest. From nuclear devastation to global manufacturing dominance in one generation. Not through oil, Japan has none. Not through land, Japan barely has any. Through the sheer collective will, intelligence, discipline, and creativity of the Japanese people. There is something embedded in Japanese culture. Something in how they see themselves, how they respond when everything looks hopeless, that produces this extraordinary capacity for transformation. And right now, that capacity is about to be activated again. This war is accelerating 3 massive global shifts: remilitarization, mercantilism, and the fracturing of the old world order. And every single one of these shifts, which look like threats to Japan, are actually the exact conditions Japan needs. Here's the first one. For 80 years, Japan has been constitutionally prohibited from maintaining offensive military forces. It has relied entirely on American protection. But as this war reveals the limits of American power, Japan is being forced to rethink everything. And when Japan decides to move, it moves fast. Japan is already expanding its defense budget, developing hypersonic missiles, advanced drone systems, next-generation submarine technology, AI-powered defense architecture. Remember the Meiji Restoration? Japan looked at everything the West had built militarily and mastered it in one generation. Japan will do exactly the same thing now with modern military technology. It will study it, adapt it, and build something that nobody else has built, something that reflects uniquely Japanese precision and ingenuity. The world is not ready for what Japan's military will look like in 15 years. But here's the second shift, and this one is even more important. This war is destroying global free trade. Nations are building their own independent supply chains. And on the surface, this looks catastrophic for an island nation that imports almost everything. But Japan has been quietly preparing for exactly this moment for decades. Japan learned from World War II, when American naval power cut off its supply lines and brought its economy to its knees. That dependency is an existential vulnerability, and it has been building resilience against that vulnerability ever since. Here's a number that should stop you cold. Japan uses approximately half the energy per unit of economic output compared to China. Half. Its manufacturing processes are the most resource efficient on Earth. Its energy storage technology is among the world's most advanced. In a world where energy is expensive and scarce, that efficiency isn't just an advantage, it's a superpower. And Japan is an outward-looking seafaring nation. Always has been. An island people that has always had to reach beyond its borders to survive. In a mercantilist world and where nations that know how to engage with the outside world will thrive, Japan doesn't need to learn a new skill. It's returning to its oldest instinct. But the third shift is the most subtle, and most analysts are completely missing it. Everyone assumes that a rising China is an existential threat to Japan. And yes, China's growing military power is a real challenge. China's control of Taiwan would create real pressure on Japan's energy supply. But here's what almost nobody is talking about. China and Japan, despite their historical tensions, have fundamentally different national mentalities. And those differences don't necessarily mean collision. China sees itself as the Middle Kingdom, the center of the universe, a self-sufficient civilization that has historically turned inward, focused on its own sovereignty, its own stability, its own development. China's deepest instinct is to be left alone. Japan is the complete opposite, an island nation that has always had to reach outward to survive, always trading, always exploring, always engaging with the world beyond its shores. China turns inward, Japan turns outward. Two nations facing completely different directions don't necessarily crash into each other, and we can already see this dynamic in practice. Despite territorial disputes, despite enormous historical tensions, China and Japan trade hundreds of billions of dollars with each other every year. Their economies are deeply intertwined. The relationship is complicated, but it is not and does not have to become a war. So here's the billion-dollar question. If someone handed me $1 billion and said East Asia, China, or Japan, where does every dollar go? Japan. Every single dollar. Not because Japan doesn't have serious problems. It does. Not because the path ahead is easy. It isn't. But because of what history, consistently, repeatedly, without exception, tells us about these people. Every single time Japan has faced an existential crisis, the Mongol invasions, the threat of Western colonization, the absolute devastation of 1945, it has responded with a speed and a completeness of transformation that left the entire world stunned. And right now, Japan is facing another existential moment. American protection is becoming unreliable. China is growing more powerful. Energy supply lines are under threat. The global economy is fragmenting. These are exactly the conditions that have historically brought out the best in Japan. China looks powerful right now. Its economy is enormous. Its military is expanding. Its influence is spreading. But China's strength is built on a model: cheap energy in, manufactured goods out, that this war is actively destroying. And China's historical response to crisis has always been to turn inward, to become more defensive, more conservative, more insular. Japan's response to crisis has always been the opposite: transform, innovate, emerge stronger than when it entered. That's why I'd put every dollar in Japan. Not because of where Japan stands today, but because of where Japan will be in 10 to 20 years. After it has done what it has always done when the world counted it out. Japan has been counted out before, by the Mongols, by the Western empires, by the aftermath of nuclear war, and every single time, Japan found a way. So the real question isn't whether Japan will rise again. The real question is anyone paying attention this time?